Good morning, Dog Nation. I am Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Kroger. It is a getaway day for me, vacation next week. Really great collection of pre-recorded shows will air while I'm gone. Now, no show on Monday in observance of the Memorial Day holiday, but Tuesday through Friday, we got a great collection of shows. Some of you are going to be a part of that. We're going to kind of do our bold predictions theme, which is going to be really fun, and some other good stuff there as well. Of course, we're all on top of whatever might come out, breaking news-wise, things like that. The rest of the DawgNation team's got you covered on all of that. But the point I'm getting to, though, here is that even though it's a vacation show, we are not mailing it in today. We are going full speed all the way to the conclusion of a terrific week, heading into the start of a wonderful summer with a chance to go for 3 and 23 right there just over the horizon. In fact, that is going to be the topic that kicks us off here today. ESPN, even some, at times, what I would say, skeptics of Georgia, some of Georgia's, every now and then, when there's negative stuff being said about Georgia, certain sources who seem to provide more of that than others, even they kind of forced to kind of bend the knee now and acknowledge just how good Georgia is and exactly where it stands on top of the college football world. To me, that seems like a great place to begin today's show. So what do you say we do just that? And also, ominous words about something we thought might be happening that maybe now, I'm not quite so sure it is. We'll give you some of that today there as well. There is a lot going on. We're going to try to cover it all. Jeff Sentell will fill in the gaps for some of the recruiting stuff that's out there as well. So let's get to it. It is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented by Kroger, and it begins right now.
Today's episode of DawgNation Daily is brought to you by Kroger, fresh for everyone.
Presented by DawgNation.com. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
One of the things we talked about the other day is that when it comes to like the preseason chatter in college football, that there is nothing wrong with talking about other teams other than Georgia. We're not quite so Georgia-centric that we don't think it's interesting. For instance, the idea that Michigan might beat Ohio State for a third year in a row. A very interesting battle that's been waging in the Big Ten the last couple of years, the emergence of Jim Harbaugh, kind of a little bit of a new era in that rivalry where for a while Ohio State was kind of on top. Michigan has kind of responded. If you want to be interested in that, there's nothing wrong with being interested in that. Urban Meyer was talking up Texas the other day. I think that Texas could be a very interesting team here this season. I think Quinn Ewers is a really good quarterback, and you got to have 4 playoff teams somewhere. So if you're thinking about kind of a slightly off the radar playoff type team, I think that Texas could potentially be a part of that discussion. There's nothing wrong with kind of including all of that. That in addition to being Georgia fans, we are also college football fans, and the overall kind of landscape of college football is interesting and fun to examine this time of year. But what we said is, and we kind of borrowed the catchphrase, Roman Reigns, the professional wrestler of the WWE, his catchphrase, which is "acknowledge me." And to me, that's kind of the way that the college football conversation should go. You want to talk about Michigan and what they might be able to do this year? Have at it. You want to talk about Texas, what they might be able to do this year? Have at it. You think Florida State could be kind of a surprise team, kind of sneaking back into the college football playoff conversation? I'm here for it. You think Clemson bounces back with a new offensive coordinator in place? I'll be willing to listen to it. You can discuss any team in college football you want to discuss, but you better begin by acknowledging me, or the team that we talk about here, the Georgia Bulldogs. You better put them in a category by themselves and then discuss what's going to happen kind of after that. And at that point in time, you can sort of get into who's left and what else and whatever, but you better acknowledge Georgia off the top as the very best team in college football and the historic nature of what Georgia might be able to put together. Now, to ESPN's credit, they recently did just that. We kind of highlight sometimes when we feel like they fall short of doing what they should do when it comes to giving enough credit to Georgia. But the other day, I think this is probably kind of in mind of 100 days out from the start of the college football season, on the morning show known as Get Up, Mike Greenberg hosted. They were doing a little bit of a college football segment. You bring on Heather Dinich. Heather at times kind of draws the ire of some Georgia fans because it seems like she's more negative than not at times about UGA or whatever else. I'll admit I'm not a huge fan either. But nonetheless, she's brought on there. They're talking Georgia football. And even Heather now is kind of forced to acknowledge that the big storyline, the big issue ahead of the college football season is the idea that Georgia has a chance to make history and becoming really the first team. And however you define the modern era, Georgia becomes the first team that has a chance to actually win 3 straight national championships. That is the storyline to begin this college football season. And obviously what Georgia does at that quarterback spot, she says, is going to have a lot in towards determining whether or not Georgia really can, as we say around here, go for 3 in 23, which then set up another kind of an interesting exchange. You're going to hear Mike Greenberg from ESPN posing the question to Heather Dinich, and they talk about the stakes that are out there for Georgia, and I would say, for the most part here, properly acknowledging exactly where Georgia stands in the ultimate pecking order of college football here right now. This is the interaction from ESPN television earlier this week.
Whoever would have thought years ago that we would be in this position, but here we are. They own the sport right now, but they need to reload at quarterback. Should we expect them to be right back there in the national championship mix?
They should be right back there because Carson Beck came out of the spring probably as the favorite, but he's going to continue competing with Brock Vandagriff for that top spot. And as I mentioned, they have 4 straight home games, all of which they should win. And so Kirby Smart is the kind of guy who's not going to be afraid to make a quarterback change if he has to get the best player on the field. They have an easier path to the college football playoff than Alabama does. Alabama's going to play Texas in a non-conference game, so it could be interesting there, but I would expect to see Georgia back in the SEC championship game and one of the top 4 teams.
The phrase that immediately kind of jumps off the page to you there is Mike Greenberg saying, hey, who would ever thought we'd be to this point? But right now you got one team who clearly owns the sport in a way that nobody else does. And folks, that is just true. Now, obviously, an audience like this, we like the idea of that being true, but sometimes what we like the idea of actually is just flat out true. Right now, Georgia is running the sport, and when you look at the overall momentum that Georgia has with its 2024 recruiting class, you get the impression that that is not something that's going to go out of style anytime soon. So credit to Mike Greenberg for fully acknowledging that. And for the most part, kind of credit to Heather Dinich there, who for the most part kind of acknowledges all of this there as well. She, she for the most part does that. I guess the one thing I would kind of nitpick with here just a little bit is, once again, kind of leaning into the idea of the Georgia schedule and this and that. Look, Georgia is not a product of its schedule. It's just not. The thing that we've said here is, I know it appears like Georgia plays a lot of easy games here in the 2023 season, at least on paper. That's what it appears it's going to be. But it's important to remember, Georgia just won the national championship game 65-7. The reason why it looks like Georgia plays a lot of easy games is because when you are currently as good as Georgia is, they're all easy games. So, the idea that somehow Georgia is a product of a schedule on paper that doesn't have the big non-conference game, that may be good fodder for a morning show like this, kind of low information folks that watch a broadcast like that. But ultimately, it's not reflective of the larger story actually in college football. Last year, Georgia played 15 games. Only 2 of them were even reasonably close. Everything else was a blowout because that's the distance that Georgia's put between itself and everybody else in college football, and specifically Alabama, who Heather mentions right there. At a certain point, and this is, I guess, where I'm going to kind of nitpick some of the ESPN conversation a little bit, but at a certain point, I think it's important to sort of cast the right narrative about Alabama. Alabama's got a responsibility right now to prove it even plays at Georgia's level. Last year it didn't. Now, historically, Alabama's obviously well established. They've won lots of national championships. But, y'all, this is not about the history books. This is not about what's happened in the past. This is about what's true here right now. And Heather herself mentions the game that Alabama has against Texas. That's not a challenge for a playoff-worthy team like Alabama to get around. That's an opportunity for Alabama to prove that it actually even is still worthy of being in the college football playoff conversation. Because the truth is, last year, with thinking college football fans, by the end of the year, Alabama wasn't. It just wasn't. It had lost 2 regular season games. I know Crimson Tide fans were begging for the chance to be included in the playoff. That was always silly. It was never going to happen. Alabama was not a college football playoff team, not a college football playoff level team, not an authentic college football playoff contender in 2022. Are they still that in 2023? They need the win against Texas to prove that. They do. It's not an obstacle to get around. It's an opportunity to demonstrate that you're still the Alabama that existed in 2020 and kind of beyond and before all of that. So that's the issue here right now, is we know what Georgia is in college football. As Mike Greenberg says, they own the sport. But when it comes to a team like Alabama, Alabama has a responsibility to prove that it actually still plays on Georgia's level. And maybe it will do that. The preseason ranking suggests they have a chance to, but they've got the obligation to go out there and demonstrate that. Last year, they just fell short of that. So I think the appropriate conversation to have with the Crimson Tide here right now is the fact that Georgia isn't the most relevant team for Alabama to compare itself to. The truth is that Alabama would do better comparing itself and measuring itself against a team like LSU, which actually prevented the Crimson Tide a year ago from being in the SEC championship game. That it's actually LSU that's worth considering here more so than a team like Georgia. That right now, part of the byproduct of Georgia proving to be as good as it's been, distancing itself from college football as much as it has, means that at least for now it's distanced itself from Alabama too. Now the Crimson Tide fan will say, well, what about 2008? What about 2012? What about 2017? Well, those are all things that happen, but they also are all things that happen in some cases the relatively recent past, and in some cases now the very far distant past, predating Kirby Smart even being head coach here at Georgia. And it is not obvious to me right now how much the current state of Alabama is actually connected to the great past that it's had with Nick Saban as head coach. That's what we're going to find out relatively early this season. But as we're finding that out, what we also expect is Georgia in many ways to replicate the success that it's had the last 2 years there as well. The way we say this is, and eventually you better believe we'll be all full steam ahead on this as an idea, go for 3 in 23. It is a historic possibility for Georgia. It's the kind of rarefied air that makes you think, well, certainly it must be almost impossible, because if it wasn't impossible, then someone would have done it before now. But the truth is, maybe Georgia just is that right team at that right moment to actually step up and do something that not even Nick Saban has been able to do, which is win 3 straight national championships. I'll give you ESPN credit for this. 100 days out from the start of the season, they have identified the only story that matters. Can Georgia chase down history? And can anybody do anything to kind of chase down Georgia? That is the only questions worth asking as this 2023 season gets ready to begin. My name is Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. We are presented today by Kroger, and we are glad to have you with us. No matter how you get to us today, live on video, 10 a.m., Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, Twitch. We start on the our own platform, DawgNation.com, DawgNation app, even earlier than that at 9:45. We love doing our first and 15. We're also available on the radio at noon on Athens Sports Radio 960 The Ref, and as a podcast, including the world-famous DawgNation.com. Just really, really appreciate you choosing one of those platforms, being a part of what we do here. We just really, really appreciate that. Whichever one works for you, we're just sort of glad it does. We try to make the show as available as we possibly can. Also, big thanks to our friends at Kroger for making all of this possible there as well. Hey, Kroger's got you locked in right now for everything you need to make the upcoming Memorial Day weekend exactly what you want it to be. You can stop by, you can get big savings in-store. You can go online, Kroger.com. You want to get the great stuff for the cookout. You want to get the great stuff for all the exciting things you have going on this time of year, with ice cream and hot dogs and burgers and buns and chips and all that kind of stuff. You can get all of that right there at Kroger to make this Memorial Day weekend everything it's supposed to be. Folks love being outside this time of year, especially when you have really nice, pleasant, not too hot yet, really great weekend weather. So go to Kroger, get stocked up, all the beverages, all the food. Make the Memorial Day weekend exactly what it should be with our friends at Kroger here this weekend. By the way, speaking of grilling out and having a good time, I want you to also have a little bit of a heads up about this. So many of you know next week we're going to be on vacation, but while I am on vacation, we're going to have a great series of pre-recorded shows. I'll talk more about that in a moment, but I want to make another point specifically known to you. We're going to kick off a great giveaway next week. I'm going to announce all the details about it. It's going to run for a couple of weeks. Your chance to enter on that. It's an awesome giveaway courtesy of Kroger and Traeger Grills. Y'all, this is one of the coolest things we've done. It really is. And it's going to be running for the next couple of weeks. We're going to announce more details about it next week. So do me a favor. Have your antenna up for this. I'm going to tell you more of the details. We're going to kick it off next week. You're going to be able to be a part of this. Just kind of a fun celebration of summer. I love summer here around DawgNation for all the fun stuff we get to do, including some really cool contests. This is going to be an awesome one. It's going to be next week that it's going to start. So please, during our show space next week, take a listen during this portion of the show when I kind of give you some details about that. And eventually we're going to kick off this contest next week. So stay very close on all of that. It's just going to be an awesome time. So that's coming up next week. Now, let me give you one or two kind of housekeeping notes, and then we'll kind of move on with the rest of the show. As we said before, this is our last live show. For those of you who are a podcast listener, obviously we record this live. You hear it in many cases the day that it's recorded. Next week, we have a series of shows that are going to run Tuesday through Friday, Monday being Memorial Day. We typically take that day off, so there won't be any broadcast at all on Monday. But Tuesday through Friday, we have a great series of pre-recorded shows that we put together while I enjoy a little bit of vacation time. I'll be back the following week, and we'll kind of cover all the news that happens. As you know, we're kind of moving into a big weekend next week for Georgia recruiting. Jeff Sentell will be popping on air, boom, right away if something big happens with that. SEC spring meetings are going to be taking place in Destin, Florida. By the way, more on that in a moment. If something big happens with that, Mike Griffith pops on. Connor Riley's going to be around. So you will not miss any big news that happens. If something breaks, we'll pop on and talk about it. Somebody will. It won't be me. I'll be away from work. But somebody will pop on and talk about it. So while our show won't reflect the news of the day necessarily, we have some terrific kind of preseason type content they'll be sharing with you. Someone from DawgNation will be live and on the air and ready to react if something really big occurs, SEC spring meetings or recruiting maybe or whatever in between. DawgNation will be all over that with you, and I hope you enjoy next week's shows. We've obviously put a lot of work into them to make them as fun and enjoyable as we possibly can because we take your time seriously. We want to make good use of your time. And then looking forward to being back the following Monday and kind of rolling into live shows again, kind of getting back to the normal format, doing 1st and 15, things like that. So for next week, the show comes on video starting at 10 a.m. There'll be no 1st and 15, no live comments at the end with our ORS Andrews cool down, but kind of back to normal with everything again the following week. So hopefully that all makes a lot of sense. All right, we're going to talk to Jeff Sentell here coming up in a moment. A lot to get into as it relates to UGA recruiting. Georgia's gotten, 4 commits in the last week? So we'll kind of cover a lot of that with Jeff. We'll also look at what's coming next for Georgia, slated to host a whole bunch of official visitors next weekend to kick off the month of June. Prior to that, though, I want to go around the Dawghouse, and it's served up today by our friends at the Finnish Long Drink. And on Wednesday's show, when Mike Griffith was here, we were talking about the SEC spring meetings next week in Destin, Florida. And I've jokingly said this before, that, listen, no better job to be in than college administration right now. By the way, I guess congratulations in order to Georgia's athletic director, Josh Brooks, who signs a contract extension, gets himself a raise. I think Josh done a good job as Georgia athletic director. I think he's a very fan-friendly AD, which is, I think, what you, about all you can ask for, really. Obviously, the football team is having incredible success right now, and Josh's leadership obviously contributes to that. But, it's that experience for the fans and, making the stadium feel nice and look nice and the concession operations and the things like that. That's some of the stuff the average fan cares about. I think that Josh Brooks has been pretty fan-friendly thus far in his tenure as UGA AD. So happy to see him get a raise, happy to see him get the extension, happy to hopefully have him here around Georgia for a long time to come. So congratulations to him on that. That comes out of those UGA spring meetings that have taken place this week there at Lake Oconee. Also, if you want to go to DawgNation.com, Mike's got a story looking at some artist renderings of how the expansion at Sanford Stadium is going to look. That one part of the stadium was not available for G-Day, has had some construction going on. They're kind of widening those concourses there, kind of creating a little bit more space for fans. They've done this other parts of the stadium. Now they're doing it there on the south side there at Sanford Stadium. And so if you want to kind of see what that's going to look like, how that's going to impact your fan experience, for those of you who kind of sit on that side of the stadium, for those of you that go to home games, good stuff from Mike Griffith there about that at DawgNation.com. You can check that out. But the other thing that kind of came out yesterday from Georgia's spring meetings there at Lake Oconee was a preview of what's going to happen next week at the SEC spring meetings in Destin. And as I said before, Mike Griffith and I talked about this on Wednesday. So if you hadn't had a chance to go back and hear DawgNation Daily presented by Kroger from Wednesday, we kind of talked about that a little bit then. That a year ago, when they got together in Destin, the thought was we may hear about a future SEC scheduling model a year ago. The notion that Texas and Oklahoma are about to come into the league, and we know that the league is getting ready to divisions. We know the league is going to start playing more opponents more frequently as opposed to what currently exists now, where Georgia plays the same, 6 teams every single year. Moving forward, they're going to be far fewer permanent opponents. That it's either going to be a 9-game conference schedule. Currently, the league plays an 8-game conference schedule. But moving forward, it's going to be a 9-game conference schedule with 3 permanent opponents, or it will be an 8-game conference schedule with 1 permanent opponent. Those seem to be the 2 models that are in place. And a year ago, we thought we might hear from the SEC an announcement they were going to the 9-game conference schedule. There had been a lot of open support for that. Nick Saban had been kind of openly in favor of that for a long time. Now, he sort of changed his tune now a little bit, kind of oddly. But for a long time, Nick Saban was kind of openly in favor of the 9-game conference slate. There's some reason to believe that the teams that sort of kind of are more in the, I guess, sort of the power position of the SEC, like the Georgias and teams like that, they kind of more favor the 9-game conference slate than not. But there was apparently some opposition to that a year ago. There was some reporting that, for instance, that Kentucky did not like the idea of moving to a 9-game conference schedule. As Kentucky has said it, well, they already play Louisville, a Power 5 non-conference opponent, every single year. That was their 9th Power 5 game, they thought. I think the read between the lines here on this is a team like that likes the money that it gets from playing an easy win home game each and every year. They're going to use that to get bowl eligible, that if you play a tougher schedule, more SEC games for a team like Kentucky that's kind of on the bubble most years, there may be fewer seasons in which they're bowl eligible, which means there may be fewer seasons in which their fans have reason to feel good about what's happening there for Kentucky football, that Kentucky sort of thought it was in its own best interest to not be in favor of a 9-game conference schedule. There's now some thought out there that more teams might feel that way. Jere Morehead, who's the University of Georgia president, spoke this week at SEC spring, or should say at the Georgia spring meetings, about the SEC spring meetings that are going to take place next week. And he definitely foreshadowed what might be a large level of disagreement about what the future of SEC scheduling is supposed to look like. Let me read this to you. And I got this quote from the Athens Banner-Herald. This is Jere Morehead saying, "I'm ready for it to be done," meaning the deliberations over whether the SEC is going to play an 8-team schedule with 1 permanent opponent or a 9-game schedule with 3 permanent opponents. He says, "We've talked about it and talked about it. I'm not sure it will get completed. We'll see. There's just a lot of dynamics still playing around on that issue." Morehead goes on to say, "I may be saying more than Commissioner Sankey would want me to say, but obviously if you go to a 9-game schedule, you have to be compensated for going to a 9-game schedule. There's still some dynamics that have to play out with our media partners." He's obviously referencing ESPN there, who's essentially the only true media partner that the SEC has. So that's Jere Morehead from the Athens Banner-Herald. And I talked about this on Wednesday, that if you're just a regular fan, to me, I would say that almost the majority, certainly the majority of us, almost maybe the entirety of us, kind of feel this way. When it was initially announced that Texas and Oklahoma were coming to the SEC, there was not widespread excitement about that. There just wasn't. On this show, online, whatever, there was not a whole lot of SEC fans like, yeah, the SEC's gotten better. I think a lot of folks thought the SEC's kind of getting weirder. I don't think that there are a lot of SEC fans that sort of feel like they have this great kinship with Oklahoma and Texas, 2 Western schools that have been a part, the old Big 8, the old Southwest Conference, Big 12. There just feels like there's a little bit of a cultural divide that has existed kind of in that western part of our country with the SEC, and it definitely felt like you're bringing in 2 outsiders to the league when you bring in Oklahoma and Texas. But over the course of time, I think some fans who are not all that jazzed about this to begin with probably made a little bit of peace with it, because at the least you're going to get a lot more better games, I guess, to use bad grammar. You're going to get a lot more games that are maybe more interesting than the current schedule that teams like Georgia played. Going to Austin more frequently, going to Norman, Oklahoma more frequently. You're going to have a great collection of rivalries added to the incredible collection of rivalries that already exist in this league. But now Jere Morehead foreshadowing what I believe is an actual real possibility, that because of money, in this case ESPN's unwillingness to spend, you may actually have less great rivalries going forward. That ultimately, for the cost of adding Oklahoma and Texas in the SEC is you don't get to play Georgia Auburn anymore every single year. You'd play it probably every other year based on the scheduling model that's in place. But if the SEC has an 8-game conference schedule in the new model going forward, we're led to believe that Georgia and Auburn won't play every year. And to me, that's a huge loss for both teams. And the same thing for like Alabama and Tennessee, 3rd Saturday in October. In an 8-game conference schedule world moving forward, there won't be 3rd Saturday in October each and every year. And, you bring Texas into the SEC, and part of the fun about that's supposed to be, well, finally now you can see Texas A&M again. But in an 8-game conference schedule world, you probably don't see that every year either, because Texas' lone permanent opponent in an 8-game conference slate is probably Oklahoma. And I don't mind telling you, if you're a Georgia fan or an SEC fan, this ought to be pretty frustrating to you. Now, I get the point that Jere Morehead's making here. I get the point that he's making is it would probably be a little bit dumb on the part of the SEC to just give all this away for free. You bring in Texas, Oklahoma, you get a little bit of a, prorated bump for adding the two schools to the league. But right now it sounds like ESPN is not willing to, or at least thus far has not proven willing to, pony up more dollars to account for the additional inventory that they might get if the SEC really expands to a 9-game conference schedule. And giving ESPN a better collection of games and getting no compensation return is probably not a good business model, not a good business idea for the SEC. I sort of get that. So I guess I kind of blame ESPN for this. That the idea that you could have 16 teams in the SEC, the option for so many great games taking place on a yearly basis, and because of ESPN's sudden frugality after they gave, all the money they've kind of given out over the course of the last couple of years, the idea that all of a sudden now ESPN's suddenly frugal, they don't want to pay more money to the SEC, and you don't get to see Georgia Auburn every year. Pat McAfee's what I'm trying to think of. They gave Pat McAfee $1 gazillion, but they can't pay the SEC extra money, to have a 9-game conference schedule, which means now you don't get Georgia Auburn every year. You don't get Alabama Tennessee every year. You don't get Texas A&M every year. That to me just sort of feels like a huge loss. So I'll be on vacation next week, but I think it actually sets up a situation in which the SEC spring meetings are going to look pretty interesting. Interesting about what announcement gets made, or as Jere Morehead sort of foreshadows here, interesting about whether or not an announcement gets made at all. And very curious to see, does ESPN prove to be a good media partner to the league here by ponying up, giving more money to justify the SEC expanding its conference schedule and giving ESPN a larger inventory of games. Pretty interesting times here in the SEC, and as the University of Georgia president kind of foreshadows in those comments I just read, it is not obvious where all of this is heading. But that is around the Dawghouse. It is served up today by our friends at the Finnish Long Drink, and I mentioned this a moment ago that right now we're heading into that kind of Memorial Day weekend time of year. People love being outside. We had a little bit of a pool party in my neighborhood yesterday to sort of celebrate the kids being out of school, and obviously folks getting ready for their cookouts and all that kind of stuff. Well, as you're doing all of that this time of year, our friends, the Finnish Long Drink, are a great accompaniment to you for that. I think the Finnish Long Drink just tastes great when you're outside. I just think it's wonderful around the pool. It's wonderful around the cookout. You're enjoying this wonderful time of year, and we love summer around here. I just think the Finnish Long Drink is great on all of that. There are 4 different varieties. If you go to thelongdrink.com, you can find out where you can pick some up today, and you can try the Long Drink Cranberry, which is super popular in my neighborhood. The Long Drink Strong, that's 8.5% alcohol by volume. Long Drink Zero, no carbs, no sugar. You want to look good in your bathing suit, that's a great way to do that this time of year. Long Drink Traditional, it's the blue can, got the grapefruit flavor, the gin kick. It's like a mixed drink in a can. You like mixed drinks? Well, you're going to love the Finnish Long Drink because it is a ready-to-drink cocktail. Kind of looks like a beer, but it's not. Great story. Comes from Finland, Helsinki, 1950s. Summer Games were there. Been in America now for a couple of years. It's pretty much everywhere all across Georgia. So go to thelongdrink.com and you can find out where to pick some up. And we certainly appreciate our friends at the Finnish Long Drink serving up around the Dawghouse to us here today. All right, so now I want to kind of transition to what we'd love to do each and every Friday. And conversations like this feel even more important right now because of all of the action that has taken place with Georgia recruiting over the course of the last few days and what is on the horizon for Georgia in the next couple of weeks ahead. These are certainly very busy times as this 2024 class gets ready to come together. So let's talk about everything that has happened and preview everything that it's about to happen. Let's do all of that with Jeff Sentell here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Kroger here today.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
So a lot to get to with Jeff Sentell here. We bring him on, DawgNation Daily, presented by Kroger. Been a big flurry of activity for Georgia recruiting the last few days, and obviously there's more of that would appear to be on the horizon there as well. So I guess, Jeff, let's start with this. The collection of commitments that Georgia has gotten this week, including Jaden Riddell, very impressive tight end prospect out of Missouri just a couple of days ago. You're talking about, 24/7 Sports Composite got him as a number 55 player in the country. He's right there along with, in conversation to be, top tight end in the country there as well. What do you like specifically about what Georgia has brought in with Jaden Riddell?
Happy Memorial Day, everybody. Happy Friday, Brandon. I think it's kind of like a continuation, Brandon. It almost feels like overkill. You can go with Elise Williams. That's the number one tight end in the country for 2025. Some people have Jaden Riddell as the number one tight end in the country for 2024. And they're very guarded, or they're very protective of some of his rankings. They're like, Jeff, why don't you go ahead and just say he's the number one tight end, because he's the number one tight end here. Well, he's the number one tight end there, but he's the number two on their composite. It all gets really sounds like math class, and we don't want Fridays with Brandon on DawgNation Daily to sound like math class. But here's Brandon, 4.41 in the 40. You look at his play, you look at what he's done. He's taken over several 707 camps, 707 showcases, just with turning 50-50 balls into Riddell balls, where he goes up, he works number 23, he looks like number 23 in the air. Brandon, here's what I love. You watch his film, and he's running a jet sweep on, like, the fourth play on his film. Brandon, there's only one tight end that has jet sweeps on their film, and that's Brock Bowers, especially their high school film. And he brings that. It's kind of awesome, Brandon, because Georgia is trying to balance it out. You see what they did. Lawson Lucky, more of a pure tight end, and attached tight end, lots of experience blocking. Colton Heinrich is the guy that they got the day before. Those two were in on an official and an unofficial together, and that tight end tough bonding stuff is already supposed to happen. And you just see a guy like Riddell is more of that offensive threat. He's really fast. He can stretch the field. He's going to go up and win balls. The athletic playmaker, explosive tight end there. When you've got the other tight end in Colton Heinrich, it's more of a do-everything type tight end, especially physically blocking. I mean, he shows the ability to do a lot of things. Riddell's going to have to learn to grow into those roles. You don't see a lot of stuff on his film on blocking at all, about, locking onto his man on the perimeter and creating those dog yards. But he's such an athlete, Brennan. He's such a talent with that curly hair. And with Todd Hartley telling him what to do with his ear, he's going to get there. And, Brennan, it's going to be a conga line of athletes tight end. One thing I want to say, and this is one of the things that just comes to my mind, I just got off the phone with another major prospect for Georgia in the 2024 class, Brandon. The commitments are all good. It's wonderful. I'm sure everybody celebrates them. I'm sure people kind of had a joke yesterday about, geez, Georgia, what's going on? We didn't have a commitment on a Thursday. Are we slacking off? Is everybody already at the lake and fired up the grill? Here's what happens, Brandon, for me, that I noticed behind the scenes doing something, the work I always do every year covering this recruiting class. And these young men on their phones are always busy, but then when they find time for you, they're like, all right, I got 5 minutes. Can we make it 6 minutes? Can we knock it out? And, like, you're at the 6 minute mark, and you're like, okay, we're at 6 minutes. That's good. Appreciate the time. And, like, they said, no, I need to tell you about this. No, I forgot to tell you about this. You need to know this. People need to know this. And on their own volition, Brandon, that, budgeted 5-6 minute phone call turns into a 12-minute phone call, because they have so much good stuff to say about what's happening right now at Georgia.
Well, that's a great thing to be able to hear. And one of the things I told our audience about Riddell the other day is that obviously the larger story right now is the growing trend in this class and all the players that are kind of coming into the class, or maybe names we expect to come into the class on the heels of Dylan Raiola's announcement a couple of weeks ago. And I think it's also important to kind of zero in on and evaluate these players individually too, because if you really watch a lot of the Riddell film, what you see is, as a player from an athletic standpoint, as you said, Jeff, that does kind of match what Georgia has been doing at the tight end position as of late. And we talked to Terrence Edwards about this yesterday, that Riddell in some respects is kind of redefining that position, or he kind of continues the way in which that position has been kind of redefined at Georgia, where all of a sudden now this is a guy who expects to be an athletic pass catcher type at a place like Georgia. When you see some of the 7-on-7 stuff that's out there and some of the other film that's kind of out there on Riddell, is you do see that sort of plus athlete that you've come to expect from Georgia, the tight end position. And so I don't think a guy like this should get lost in the shuffle of everything else that's going on with UGA recruiting, because individually there's a lot to like about Jaden in particular, in just kind of the fishbowl of evaluating just him.
Brendan, here's a little thing I do when I look at film, and I look at the upper echelon film of the guys that are getting close to getting the Hartley offer, or have the Hartley offer early. I'm actually looking at a lot of 2027 tight ends, 2026 tight ends already. But as I go through this is how I look at tight ends, and I have a benchmark to determine whether that is a Georgia tight end or an SEC tight end or another Power 5 type tight end. It's pretty simple. I don't know if that's the method Terrence uses, but what I use is I sit there and I look on film and I'm like, can you dial up this player's number and get an explosive 30-yard play? And can you do this over and over? Can he show this over and over? And really, there are a lot of great tight ends in the country, Brandon. We've talked about them a lot. We've covered them a lot. There are a lot of really good All-American high school tight ends that you can say, that guy's going to get you a 15-yard play or a 20-yard play in the SEC. Very, very few can get you a 35, 40-yard touchdown play in the SEC. Jaden Riddell is one of those guys, and he clearly bullseyes the benchmark for what I'm looking for now, what I've seen so far as a pattern for a Georgia tight end under Todd Hartley.
How about Heinrich and Harrison, the two guys that came into the class a little earlier this week? You know, those are names that, I mean, Heinrich I feel like we kind of got to know because of some of the visit stuff that had gone on, but probably names that you and I have discussed together less frequently. We've discussed some of these other names. What can you tell us about them and what it is that Georgia's adding with a big-time offensive interior, you know, certainly big guy, I should say, you know, very big offensive lineman out of New York, you know, Heinrich, another tight end, you know, out of the state of Florida. What is Georgia getting out of both those guys here right now?
Yeah, I want to start with Harrison because I think Harrison's probably, and it's funny, Brandon, if you look by pure ratings, Harrison and Heinrich are two of the three lowest rated guys in the Georgia class right now. Harrison's going to get a big bump as more people see him. Harrison is actually from from Iowa, not Hawaii. I've got Hawaii on my mind for a really good reason. But, like, he's from Iowa, and his dad is a farmer. And what Harrison wants to do, besides play really great football for 15, 20 years, is he wants to be a farmer as well. He's going to major in agribusiness at Georgia. You don't usually hear that, but, like, for him, his dream in life is to be a farmer one day after a long football career. And I love his mindset. Something he has said, and even said it publicly, is he said, I don't know where I would be right now without the game of football. Brandon, in this NIL culture where players have to get de-recruited, especially the ones that have the game and the film and the attention that would command the Georgia offer and to commit and sign to Georgia, there's sometimes you got to dial them down a little bit. I don't think any dial down will be necessary for Marcus Harrison. Brandon, he's 6'7" plus. He's got a Dikembe Mutombo reach wingspan. 320-ish. But the thing about him, Brandon, is he hasn't had a growth spurt in like 4 years. He was 6'6" and 280 when he was an 8th grader. And he's the guy, if you watch his film, he's out there getting on guys like Broderick Jones got on guys in the playoffs and in the stretch drive to another natty for the Dogs. He can go out there and block that corner on the edge. He can go grab a safety on the second level. He's that athletic. He moves that well. Heinrich is a guy that just has been polishing. Parents were both Division I athletes. Mom was a college basketball coach. It's funny, anybody knows that movie Love and Basketball? Well, his parents had a love and basketball type love story when they were coming up and they were courting. Mom actually beat Dad in the game, but Dad won her heart and got his future wife out of it. They ended up coaching together on the same college basketball team. His mother, Marilyn, was the head coach, and his dad, Jeff, was the assistant coach. Imagine that of all things. And Heinrich can go out and get it, too. He plays for a throw-happy offense. A lot of readers, I got some responses about, okay, there's the 3 stars, and they're wanting to see an explanation for a 3-star. Well, Brendan, he had 35 offers, and his final four official visits, they were Ohio State, Alabama, Georgia, and North Carolina. I mean, if you have Alabama, Georgia, and Ohio State in your final 4, you're much better than a 3-star prospect. You're much better than the nation's number 31 tight end. I think the world will see that. The people were asking me about his numbers. They wanted to see a tight end with a little bit more numbers. He plays in a true air raid offense, Brandon, where I think 8 guys on his team last year had 25 or more catches. So they spread the ball around a lot. Heinrich has got a frame where he's going to lock on and move defenders around, even though that's really not what they do. They have him in the slot a lot, where he plays off the ball about 50% of the time. He's also an H-back for their program as well. Really strong program, Brandon. He's been a part of 2 state championship basketball teams in high school, 1 state championship football team. He was an all-state tight end last year. I mean, I think this is one of those positions, Brandon, where the Hartley stamp says a lot about the type of player that Georgia would ever want to bring in.
You got a good story up at DawgNation.com yesterday with Casey Poe, the terrific four-star offensive lineman out of Texas, recently at Georgia there as well. A lot of Georgia fans sort of feel like this could be maybe one of the next in line to maybe go public with a UGA pledge. I'll let you tell us if you think that's true or not. But you also hear a little bit about Clemson here. Sometimes you hear a little bit about Alabama. I guess how competitive is the landscape still for Poe right now?
It's competitive. I think Alabama's going to get a very meaty, weighty visit coming on. You see a lot with he's going to take Clemson as well. He's got Texas Tech in there. He's got Auburn in there. He still wants to take visits after those first 5. He wants to take visits to Oklahoma. He wants to take visits to LSU. So there's some contenders here, Brandon, but he told me he'd already had his Georgia checked every box. Georgia set the bar extremely high. But he said he's already had his moment where if he chooses to go to Georgia, it was the way Tate Ratledge sold him on what life is like as a Bulldog. It was everybody thinks that it's win or go home, that if you don't play real early, you're going to get kicked out. It's going to be very businesslike. It's going to be cold-hearted. Tate Ratledge, he's more than a mullet, more than a mustache, and more than a co-host on a very interesting podcast and YouTube show these days. Tate nailed it, man. He hit the bullseye. He hit over and over and over again. One of the things, Casey, folks, you're going to love this kid. He has like 10 to 15 coaches, football coaches in his family. He told me a great story about he knows Georgia's going to be hard. Georgia is all high energy. Georgia is high effort. He said the freshman year is going to suck, but he's like, you know what? Sometimes in life, to be great, we've got to embrace the suck, to go through something you don't want to do. That sort of mindset, that sort of ethos to get to where you want to be in life. That's what we all have to go through. Hard-working kid, Brandon. I think of all the players that Georgia is recruiting to join the 2024 class and protect Ryan Puglisi and to protect Gunnar Stockton and to protect Dylan Raiola, I think Casey Poe has the highest threshold to come in and play right away. Scouting terms, you would call that a floor, or a guy that is not too far away from playing in the SEC. Maybe not at a place like Georgia or in Alabama, although their offensive line at Alabama isn't what it used to be. I think that Casey is a guy that was enamored, and Georgia put the hook in his mouth really hard, man. And he's going to have to take a couple of visits to figure out just how great Georgia is, just how different Georgia is than anybody else. What we can report behind the scenes here about what hasn't shown up on DawgNation.com is we're noticing, we're listening. There's a lot happening behind the scenes with Dylan Raiola, building relationships with all these potential players in the class. And there is already a very strong bond there connected between Casey Poe and Dylan Raiola. Both of them anchor their lives around their Christian faith, their strong Christian faith, and whatever they can do with their platform to let folks know that Jesus and God shines through them every day. These young men both walk that type of walk in their life, and they've become very fast friends.
It's great to hear. Let's talk timeline here just for a moment. So I'm assuming kind of maybe quiet this weekend because of the holiday, although sometimes recruits have a tendency to want to make announcements on holidays, maybe for the Georgia coaches themselves, hopefully getting a little time away, and then obviously setting the stage for the gigantic week next week, especially heading towards the weekend. So give me a little bit of a reminder, especially for our folks who may be kind of in and out and kind of busy and having a hard time keeping track, that first series of official visits to kick off the month of June, first collection of visitors coming in there, just how seismic this next 7 to 10 days is going to be here for Georgia.
I think, Brandon, there will be a lot of guys that get some family time in right here this weekend. A lot of people shift down. Although it's funny, Brandon, a lot of recruits are taking official visits this weekend. Sammy Brown is taking his official visit to Tennessee, trying to fit all the schools he needs to see in. You've really got, where's my number at on my phone? I'm going to try and pull it out of my head, but not my phone. But I think there's 8 5-stars that are coming for the first weekend in June, and I think there's already 7 confirmed for the second weekend in June, Brendan. That's 15 5-stars, considering Georgia already hosted guys like Jeremiah Smith for the official visit weekend for the scavenger hunt. You're gonna see somewhere. I mean, I'm just trying to talk 5-stars in the 2024 class as well, Brandon. That is different. That is going to be 2 weekends in June, which probably take up a lot of that Georgia recruiting budget, but it's also going to really not just the seeds have already been planted, Brandon. I've kind of referred to Georgia recruiting as, from January to May is recruiting time, evaluation time, and then May and June is closing time, and then the month of July is the committing time. That's the traditional framework or the blueprint, the roadmap that Georgia coaches, and now a lot more high school players want to convey in their recruiting so they get everything done before Georgia tries to go #go for 3 in 23.
There you go.
Go for 3 in 23. And then before these other guys try to get another state championship ring or their first championship ring, there's a convenience. Casey's a great example. Casey's going to be a football coach one day, Brandon, so he wants to get his stuff out of the way before his football season so he can focus on Lindale High School and that last senior year ride because it matters to him. It matters to the players he's surrounded himself with for years. And again, it all comes back to Georgia trying to pick the right players and to pick the right fits and not necessarily the most talented players. If you want to kind of read between the lines about a lot of this stuff, you could say Marcus Harrison is currently a 3-star rated player. You could say Colton Heinrich is a 3-star rated player. But I can assure you, Brandon, in the strongest terms here, that they are 5-star fits for the University of Georgia in a lot of areas.
So where Nitro Tuggle the other day was calling his shot on Justin Scott, terrific defensive line prospect. How real do you think that is right now? Because obviously, Georgia fans are always going to kind of gravitate towards a big defensive line prospect like that. How would you assess Georgia's chances with Scott at the moment?
Very strong. Everybody can watch the social media edits about Miami and crystal ball picks. I'm going to tell you, Brandon, and it probably is honestly and transparently as I can say this, Justin Scott is going to come to Georgia, and he's going to be expecting Georgia to blow his mind. He's going to be expecting Georgia to reset the levels of his recruitment. I'll say this. I don't think the Justin Scott recruitment really even begins or is underway until Georgia has got him on campus for an official visit. According to my information, that's going to be his first real extended visit with Georgia. Somehow, Brandon, the Dogs are in that saying, somehow you got these wink-wink emojis from other key Georgia commitments when he's never really spent some time and been around Georgia. Now, he's from the Chicago area. He's seen Michigan. He's seen Notre Dame. He's seen Miami. I think he's waiting to see just exactly if Georgia's everything he's imagining it to be. And if it is, might get a chortle out of you, Brandon, in a few weeks.
No doubt. That would definitely be a chortle-worthy commitment. Let me finish with this, if you don't mind. I haven't talked about this a ton just because I don't know. But it is a contrast, is it not? The fact that, Georgia last weekend was busy doing what it was doing, obviously having, Dylan Raiola on campus and doing the throwing session and stuff like that, clearly busy at work. And at the same time, you sort of see, Nick Saban out in Italy. And listen, he's got a right to take a vacation. Obviously, everybody does. And, I'm sure that was a fun trip. But that is an interesting distinction, right? That Georgia was as busy working as it was while Nick Saban's kind of gallivanting through Europe. I try not to necessarily grab every piece of low-hanging fruit that's out there, but hard not to notice the difference there. Am I being unfair pointing that out, Jeff?
I think it's unique. That's the way to say it. We don't normally see this. And it's maybe you've got Alabama on holiday, and that can say two things. Number one, they feel really good about the recruiting class that's coming together and where Alabama recruiting is at. And maybe they feel really good about how Justice Haynes looks in the backfield and Caleb Downs and Dallas Turner look on their defense. But I think maybe it's more of a reason that Georgia has. There's two really strong thoughts on this. Maybe it's a reason that Georgia has such a great tradition for the scavenger hunt in late May, where they don't want to do it on Memorial Day, but they want to do it in late May. And, Brandon, the other thing is just basically efficiency's sake and timing and logistics. These kids are going to take more officials, and there's not 6 weekends in June. There's not 5 weekends in June. So what they're going to try to do is they're going to try to find a way to bring kids in early. One of the things we have noticed, Brandon, and we've heard that on the recruiting trail with people telling us this, Stacey Searles even told Casey Poe this, is there's a reason why Georgia is structuring their official visits the way they are. If you're coming in the scavenger hunt weekend or the first or second weekend in June, that's who Georgia sees as their priority guys. The guys that they want to make sure they get a good bite of the apple first and get a chance to claim their seat on the bus because the bus is really filling up for the chance to become Bulldogs. And the players that are coming in should be considered especially the first 2 weekends in June, even if their star rankings did not, those players should be considered as guys that have the ability to really be high up on the food chain with Georgia. In most cases, I'm not going to say all cases because I know there's some players that timing and that's the only weekend they could get with other scheduled officials. There's a lot of players that if they want to grab a place on Georgia's roster, if they want to grab a place in this class, Brandon, that I will tell you right now will set the new record as far as rankings go and a team score in Georgia football history. It will bust that one and clear that one wide open, and it will challenge to get around that 331, 332, 333 mark. Brandon, I did some math the other day because I had so many people asking about it. Like, what exactly do you see that you can tell us? And I said this on Hedges on Wednesday. Brandon, I think there's out of the top 100, there are 27 or 28 players that I think Georgia is in the shooting match with. And 8 of those are already committed to Georgia. So I see out of those other 19, I can see Georgia winning about 8, 9, 10 of those recruitments and getting somewhere around 17, 18, 19 signees inside the top 100. Brandon, that would mean a right around 8 or 9 5-stars. And I know you know this, but the record ever for 5-stars, that's 8 by Texas A&M. Now, I know On3 is a different dynamic with their industry ranking. So for history's sake, when we're comparing history, and one of the reasons why I think I fall back a lot on 24/7 Sports Composite is just if you want to do any sort of trends over a 5-10 year period, On3 wasn't really around for that, right. Even though if they have some of the same people doing the rankings. But most Georgia's ever had is 7, and that was in the 2018 class. I expect this class, Brandon, to surpass that.
Really, really very interesting. All right, Jeff, this will be the last time I get a chance to talk to you for a little while. I'm going to be on vacation next week. So let me just say this very quick, and you give me a short answer here. Is there anything that we should have asked you about that we didn't?
I think you got to start talking about what happens with DeMarcus Riddick.
Okay.
In the class in Alabama, currently a 5-star, not acting like a 5-star commitment. Why do we say this? Young people can do what they want, but he wasn't there for G-Day. He hasn't came in the spring and May for visits. You haven't seen Georgia out publicly evaluating him. Alabama and Auburn are trying hard. Of course, maybe Nick Saban was out in Italy because he was looking for a new sports car to tour recruits around campus with because he's already broken out his Mercedes. But I think what Georgia's doing with the potential of Justin Williams, who was really feeling Georgia on that unofficial visit, that's the number 1 linebacker in the country. I've got a source, Brandon, a pretty good source, that told me on his last day of his junior year, Justin Williams was wearing a Georgia shirt on his last day of school, right off the heels of that unofficial visit. He's a potential backup plan for DeMarcus Riddick. And isn't it just the most Georgia thing where if you lose a commitment from the nation's number 3 linebacker and a 5-star, that perhaps you can replace him in the class with the number 1 and the number 2 linebackers in the country? That would be Justin Williams. That would be Sammy Brown as well. That's something I think that should be on Georgia fans' mind, where Georgia can lose a 5-star commitment potentially over the next couple of months and then replace him with higher-rated players. That's a very Georgia recruiting guy statement thing to say, but it is real. And also, I will tell you, another potential Nigerian nightmare for Georgia is Joseph Jonah Ajanye. I think maybe I should give you an obstacle course one day, Brandon, with all the different pronunciations and the phonetics in the class. So I know not only you would learn it, but I know all the readers out there would learn it as well, because there's some different phonetics here with this best ever class Georgia's putting together. But I tell you, Brandon, Joseph Jonah Ajanye, not only is he a dude, not only did he really love his unofficial visit over this weekend in Athens, he's already scheduled his June 23rd visit. Let me tell you how that went down, Brandon. He was taking his unofficial visit to Georgia to see it for the first time, and he had already, like almost a wedding date, he had already saved the date that if Georgia hit the mark, then he was going to lock in a June 23rd official visit. Well, Georgia hit the mark, and Georgia locked in the June 23rd official visit. That stuff right there, Brandon, is different. Guys coming into Georgia with already a planned official visit set up, even though they were going into their first visit because they knew they were probably going to love it, and then they loved it even more. And I'll stress also that thing I shared at the beginning of the call for people that are just hopping on, is you find yourself, and a lot of times these recruits are just beaten to death by talking to people. It's not just reporters. it's coaches, and it's coaches at every school that are trying to shoot their shot. And with a lot of these players, they can't wait to tell you more about their trip at Georgia. It is really fun where they're like, they sometimes say, "I'm sorry I've kept you long, but I wanted to hear that part." It's a different batch of players in this group, and I think part of it is the kids that they're choosing. Kirby Smart is in the strawberry patch, picking the right exact fruits he wants, the right exact shapes and sizes and textures. But it's also about a lot of these kids that just see what's happening at Georgia, what has happened, the elite NFL development, the elite championships, and they can see in their mind's eye a way that things are only going to get better in Athens, and they want to be a part of it. It really is a special time.
Jeff, really good stuff. Thank you so much for sharing that with us here on the DawgNation Daily presented by Kroger here today. I know you'll be all over this next week while I am away, and I certainly appreciate all of that. And then we'll obviously hear from you on the show next week, too, just not necessarily with the twists and turns of the current recruiting cycle, but you'll be all over that on Before the Hedges and on the pages of DawgNation.com. And then 2 Fridays from now, we'll be back talking recruiting as we always do. So, Jeff, I will look forward to doing that with you then. Hope you have a terrific Memorial Day weekend, and we will talk soon.
Thanks, Brandon. Enjoy your vacation. I know you deserve it, and you definitely earned it for us, man. Recharge and relax, buddy.
Thanks a lot. I appreciate that, Jeff. Thank you very much.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
Jeff certainly delivered there on that. Really strong recruiting information. Appreciate that from Jeff. And obviously he mentions the idea of a vacation, which makes me think about some of the vacations that some of you get a chance to take here this summer. I'm talking about Royal Caribbean Cruise vacations. Now, I'm not on a Royal Caribbean Cruise next week. Looking forward to a short weekend cruise before the summer is done. Excited about that. But listen, you can be excited about your own Royal Caribbean Cruise vacation really anytime. Summertime, heading towards late 2023, early 2024, the debut of Icon of the Seas. Really no bad time to take a Royal Caribbean Cruise vacation. And this is the time to sort of step up and find out more about that. Even some chatter behind the scenes about, some stuff related to DawgNation here. Maybe next year we're thinking about that. Never too soon to start thinking about what that might be. So we'll tell you more about that when we have a chance to. Jessica Slater, you can give her a call, 770-718-9147. That's 770-718-9147. She's a terrific travel agent. Royal Caribbean really believes that the experience of booking a Royal Caribbean cruise vacation made better when you use a great travel agent like Jessica. So reach out to her. Let her walk you through all the options that are available to you. You can choose the port you want to sail out of. For me, I like kind of going out of Port Canaveral because it's closer. Just drive down to, kind of just past Orlando. You're there. You can also go to, Port Everglades there in Fort Lauderdale or the Port Miami. In fact, that's where Icon of the Sea is going to be next year. So whichever one's kind of closest to you, even if you're thinking about sort of nationally, different kind of ports there as well. But for us, just south of here, down in Florida, great chance to get on a great Royal Caribbean cruise ship and go and enjoy the Caribbean this time of year. Just so much fun. Perfect day, Coco Cay, all the other stops in which Royal Caribbean's famous for. You can check all of that out. Jessica's going to help you with it. 770-718-9147. That's the number. 770-718-9147. She'll get you going on that here this summer. And speaking of the summer, we are definitely in a little bit of a summertime vibe when it comes to the SEC right now. So yesterday there was a very sort of classic summer debate that kind of got going, and I don't know. Some of this stuff is obviously not meant to be taken all that seriously. So Auburn is celebrating today. They have not had much to celebrate athletically in quite some time, but they were celebrating because they just had a Buc-ee's open at Auburn. Now, by now, most of you know what Buc-ee's is. It's basically like if you combine Disney World with a gas station. By the way, Kaylee Mansell, who's producing today, she's got her Buc-ee's cup going there. I like to see that. That's almost like one of those, like, I'm not saying that Kaylee has wine in her cup right now, but it's almost like one of those wine, like tumbler type things. So we'll let whatever she's got in that cup be left to itself, but that's what it kind of looks like. But she's got her Buc-ee's cup with her right now is the point of all of this. And so Buc-ee's is like the combination, for those of you who are not aware, between a gas station and Disney World. Like, it just really is something that you have to see to understand. And so a Buc-ee's is now opened in Auburn, and that got Auburn on its official Twitter account bragging about this. Let me show you the graphic. My take on this is actually going to surprise you a little bit. So Auburn puts out the graphic yesterday. The only SEC school with a Buc-ee's. And you got the Auburn football guy there. You get the Buc-ee mascot, which if we're going to be honest here for a minute, I guess that's a beaver. Bucky's a beaver, right? Almost a little bit kind of standing on Eddie the Blind Squirrel's corner here. I feel like there's a little bit of copyright infringement there, but technically Eddie's a squirrel and Bucky's a beaver, so I guess it's not the same animal. But the point is, it's somewhat similar. Anyway, though, you see the Bucky's kind of deal there below. I actually kind of like this. This is the type of thing that I think SEC teams should be doing in the summer. I don't think this is meant to be taken seriously. I think it's just kind of funny. Auburn doesn't do a lot of stuff that's funny or entertaining or enjoyable, so when they actually stumble into something, I'm going to give them a little bit of credit for that. I don't mind Auburn celebrating itself as the only SEC school with a Bucky's. I feel like that's the kind of fun type content these SEC teams should be looking to do here in the early portion of the summer, because when something like that happens, almost certainly there's a flurry and a barrage of responses to it. The best one of those probably came from Lane Kiffin yesterday, who took a chance to also kind of brag about what Ole Miss has. If Auburn's going to brag about a Bucky's, Lane Kiffin put it up on Twitter that Ole Miss is the only school in the SEC that has a Chevron that sells chicken on a stick. And that's kind of one of those famous sort of like gas station type foods that the local Chevron has there. Ed Orgeron was somewhat famous for, I guess, going in and eating that, every single week, which, honestly, fried chicken on a stick actually sounds pretty good. So I don't always love Lane Kiffin either, but I think he's well within his rights going to do this there on that. It's a pretty funny graphic. Ole Miss on Twitter is actually usually pretty good. They have whoever runs their social media has a pretty good sense of humor, generally speaking, and that even predates Lane Kiffin being head coach there. So my opinion on this might surprise you. Normally I'm going to kind of be snarky and take jabs when the opportunity exists. But I'm not going to take a shot at either Auburn or Ole Miss. This is the kind of stuff you should do in the summer. I know that some Georgia fans have kind of done their own version of some of this there a little bit. I'm here kind of for all of that. Whatever it takes to pass the time, right? Fall will be here before you know it. We love summer as a precursor to fall. But, for those of us who love college football, this is what you do. You kind of find something to sort of joke about or argue about or whatever else. And so Auburn contributed some of that yesterday, and I'm guessing that the Auburn Bucky's will probably be a pretty popular location. The first Bucky's I ever went to was the Bucky's in Leeds. It's just outside of Birmingham. That was the first Bucky's I ever went to. Probably the one I frequent the most is the one down there, kind of Warner Robins, Fort Valley area in Georgia. That's probably my like in-network Bucky's, I guess you'd probably say. That's the one I probably go to the most. But listen, we've hit Calhoun before. We're no stranger to Bucky's. There's no doubt about that. On a more serious football-oriented note, I thought Barrett Slee had an interesting piece at CBSSports.com looking at the teams that have been most positively impacted by the transfer portal thus far this season, as you're probably not all that surprised to see. A lot of SEC teams on this list. I just kind of want to bounce through this a little bit because I do think that if you're trying to make sense right now of what's what and who's who and who the real contenders really are, what's going on in the transfer portal is a big part of that conversation. Now, Barrett ranks Auburn at number 2. He had Colorado at number 1. To me, I think you got to put a huge asterisk on the idea that Colorado's been positively impacted by the transfer portal, because while they have brought a lot of guys in, they've also lost a lot of guys there as well. That the Colorado, compliance office has been a little bit like Grand Central Station. People coming in, people going out. I don't think we quite yet have a full idea of exactly where they shake out on that, but just given the fact they've lost so many players, including in some cases players that Dion would have wanted, I believe, I don't know that you can necessarily view all of this as a true net positive, even though it's a Shedeur Sanders and obviously Travis Hunter, guys that you clearly would want no matter who you are. They've also lost a lot of guys there as well. So I guess I'm a little bit wait and see still on Colorado. My expectation is that's a team that probably wins 3 or 4 games here this year. So I'm not quite so sure how positive their benefit from the transfer portal is going to be right now. But Barrett puts Auburn at number 2. Now, here's what I think is interesting about Auburn. And I've told you before, I do expect Hugh Freeze to make a positive difference for Auburn this season. He's clearly a better coach than Brian Harsin. Brian Harsin was at ESPN.com this week trying to tell his side of the story on the whole Auburn fiasco. I don't know that he helped himself. Harsin, fact of the matter is just below the standard of what's required, to be an SEC coach. It's not his fault that he's not a better coach than that. It's Auburn's fault that it hired him. But the idea that, that Harsin wants to kind of rehabilitate his image, whatever else, honestly, I think as long as Brian Harsin stays out west and coaches in sort of a group of 5 type place like Boise or somewhere like that, I'm sure he's a fine coach. I just think down here in the rough and tumble SEC, he's not cut from the right cloth to survive down here. So from that standpoint, Hugh Freeze is an upgrade over what Brian Harsin was. But in terms of how much Auburn's going to be benefited from the transfer portal, I think a lot of this kind of depends on whether or not Peyton Thorne, the quarterback they bring in from Michigan State, whether or not he actually emerges and wins the quarterback job against Robbie Ashford. I'm guessing this is a real competition. Now, you can say that Thorne is probably the favorite to win the job. I believe that's probably true. He wouldn't be coming to Auburn unless he was. But when you look at how Peyton played, started last couple of years, Michigan State, against some of the better teams that Michigan State faced, including that 2021 season, which was probably the one that, kind of Thorne hangs his hat on right now, not always at his best against the best competition the Spartans face. So on the basis of that, it's not obvious to me that Thorne actually wins that starting job and beats out Robbie Ashford, especially given the athletic edge that Ashford probably has. So I think it's an interesting competition there. And in terms of how much of a boost Auburn gets in the transfer portal, what happens with that quarterback competition probably goes a long way towards determining that. Florida State comes at number 3 on this list. And it seems like every year there's a hyped-up team in the offseason that proves not worthy of that hype once the year actually begins. I feel like Iowa State was that team a year or so ago. Just there's this team that everybody seems to be talking about during the offseason, and right now I would say that Florida State is kind of that team right now. And I think some of us are kind of allergic to some of this hype because we've sort of felt like we've been there before on that. But in the case of Florida State, I do think you have to seriously consider the idea this was already a pretty good team a year ago, and as Barrett points out here at CBS Sports, they may have dramatically improved itself through the transfer portal there as well, most notably bringing in Keon Coleman, the wide receiver, just the other day. But they've effectively used the portal in other ways, there as well. That I believe that right now you've got to look at Florida State as a legitimate playoff contender. I really do. And I think the ACC with both Florida State and Clemson could be somewhat interesting. But there is a chance that the attention that's being paid to Florida State is not unwarranted, that this really is a very good team. And a relatively deep roster already may have gotten better because of the transfer portal. Below Florida State on this list, Barrett's got LSU, which is fun, is the fact that LSU and Florida State also battle each other to begin the season. That could end up being the biggest game of the season in some respects. When you talk about overall impact of the game itself, impact on the college football playoff race, LSU and Florida State, week 1 from Orlando, that's about as good as it gets this upcoming year. I think that's going to be a lot of fun. So keep your eye on that. Transfer portal making a big impact on some of these teams trying to join Georgia in this college football playoff race this year. We'll make that cruising around the SEC courtesy of Royal Caribbean. And before we wrap up today, let me also remind you one thing. So next week, we are on vacation. I've told you that before. I got a great collection of pre-recorded shows on the way. I want to give you a couple of things to look for. First of all, we're going to have a great discussion around the idea of bold predictions for the upcoming season. Mike Griffith will hear some of his. Jeff Sentell will hear some of his. That's going to be a lot of fun. Many of you have been sharing yours. I'm going to read some of yours as part of the show. I've got 3 bold predictions myself that I'll be sharing with you next week. That's going to be really good. Also, a great interview with Georgia quarterback Jake Fromm. The interview that I recorded with Jake this week, we decided to save for next week. In that particular interview, we're going to run this on Thursday of next week. Jake tells a great story about the first time he interacted with Brock Bowers and kind of, what he learned about Brock very, very fast that maybe he didn't fully appreciate prior to that. Jake tells a very good story about that. So the point is that we don't take it lightly, the idea that we step away. We're not doing the live show the way we typically do, but we try to really put a lot of emphasis on making the shows that we put together while we're on vacation as good as they can possibly be. So a terrific interview with Jake Fromm next week, a wonderful theme that kind of keeps our conversation going. And, of course, if anything big happens related to recruiting, Jeff's going to be live and talking to you about that somewhere on the DawgNation video channels. And anything else that kind of breaks out as it relates to UGA or the SEC or anything like that, we're going to be all over that here on DawgNation. And then I will look forward to speaking to you again the following Monday after that. So with that said, we can wrap up the show here today. And we do so with a wonderful collection of golden shoes. I'm going to give you a handful of these today just to kind of try to go out on a strong note to close out our week. In fact, the first one here, our buddy Mad Dog, obviously enjoying the recruiting success of Georgia as of late. You see Kirby Smart there with the big foam finger #1. Mad Dog saying Georgia now has the #1 ranked recruiting class for 2024. Mad Dog, that is true, and we expect it to stay there. We'll give you a golden shoe for that. Well done, as always. How about our next one here? James Couch shared this with me. Lousy stinking Gators. You see the dumpster on fire there with the Florida Gator logo on it. Bubby Dean also kind of making that there too. Bubby loves hating on the Gators. James shared that with me, so we'll give golden shoes all around for that. Any reference to the lousy stinking Gators will get you a golden shoe here on DawgNation Daily almost for sure. Houston Evans, speaking of the lousy stinking Gators, Houston's down in Jacksonville. He says, great news on the extension of the cocktail party. Looking forward to barbecuing more Gators like this during the tailgate here in Jacksonville. You see right there on your screen. Another one of those. This is the second time this week we've shown a Gator on the grill. That is a Gator cooked up right there for sure. I don't know that I could eat that, but maybe when you get down there in the spirit and the vibe down in Jacksonville, maybe I'd find out I was capable of more than I realized. But there you go, Houston. That's a really good picture of that Gator cooked up. And we think that Georgia's going to cook up Florida again this fall there as well. Bill Sanders shares this. He says, hey, DawgNation Daily, is this your truck? And for those of you listening radio podcast, it is a finished long drink truck, which I like to see. And, Bill, I'm glad when you see that, you think about us here on DawgNation Daily. I'll tell you this, they could back that thing right up to my driveway, and I'll take all their product off their hands for them. I know Kaylee Manziel feels the same way about that, Bill, so we appreciate you sharing that. We'll make you a golden shoe winner today there as well. And Philip Thomas shares this too. He says, we passed through the small South Georgia town today and surprisingly did not see a marble statue of the two-time national champion quarterback. He says, let's put those local tax dollars to good use and get it done. So Philip goes through Blackshear there and gets a chance to be in Stetson Bennett's hometown. Listen, I'm right there with you, Philip. I'd love to see a statue for Stetson in Blackshear and really anywhere else that some of these dogs could be honored. I'd love to be able to see that, but I'm glad to see you traveling, having a good time here this summer, and we will definitely give you a golden shoe indeed. You use the hashtag golden shoe in your particular message there. So Philip will give you a golden shoe indeed. Is that our last one? Oh, that's our last one. So good stuff there to everybody else included. Great golden shoe submissions here to close out the week. By the way, speaking of the lousy, stinking Gators, Georgia back in Jacksonville, 155 days from right now, beating Florida again, cooking them up on the grill, and just generally speaking, having a very good time. That is our Gatorator countdown. Speaking of good times, hope you guys enjoyed the weekend and enjoyed next week there as well. Got great shows on tap for you while I'm gone, and then back live again the following Monday. So we'll talk to you then here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Kroger. And on video, time now for the R.S. Andrews Cool Down. R.S. Andrews, the one you turn to for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, and electric needs. They show up on time. They do the work that's promised, the price that's promised. I'm going to take your comments, but I also kind of want to mix some of this into there as well. So we have so many, an overwhelming amount of these like bold predictions, and I ran some on the show yesterday. We've got some of those next week, and I just wanted to try to get some more of those in to sort of give you a taste of what next week's going to be like. So I think Kaylee's going to help me with this. Kaylee, let's show, number 5 here on this. A lot of folks sharing some stuff. Bold predictions this upcoming season. Nathaniel Otto says Georgia's going to be the Super Bowl champs, which maybe one day they will. Nick Mewburn says we're going to have a Heisman Trophy in our case next year. I love the idea of that. Robert Morris also on the subject of Carson Beck winning the Heisman. And UGA surpassing the 2021 defense. That's all fun. He says Nigel Combs has 3 wide receivers going over 800 yards. I'd take that. You better believe that. Josh Cahill says UGA's toughest road game is going to be Auburn. This is actually a really fun prediction, and I sort of get where Josh is coming from in this. He says it's the first true road game for Carson Beck. You got a new kicker as well. Something tells me Hugh Freeze is going to have his team ready, even if undermanned. I think that Josh could be onto something. The fact of the matter is we think that Tennessee could lose a couple of games prior to playing Georgia, that the overall vibe for Georgia-Auburn could actually end up feeling a little bit bigger. Josh, that's a pretty fun prediction, or at least certainly a very interesting prediction. R. Wallace has Beck winning the Heisman, Georgia going 15-0. Coach Grace the also says dogs win the Super Bowl. That's very funny. Johnny Surfdog, who's obviously one of our prolific commenters, says that Tennessee is going to prove that last year was just a flash in the pan. They're going to lose 4 games this year. Johnny, I like that. Kerr with no name says Tennessee scores 10 or less in the most hyped up revenge game ever, obviously mocking the vibe around that Georgia-Tennessee game this year. Goes on to say that Kirby doesn't call off the dogs this time in the middle of the third quarter. He said it's a 40-10 type of win, praying for some crowd noise and some rain. Boy, that's good stuff. That's fun to think about. Dawg Andrews got a freshman running back going over 1,000 yards this season. Boy, that's fun. How about them dogs? says, for everyone saying the three-peat, he said, I don't know, that's bold because the fact that people are predicting to happen. He says, my bold take is we have a breakout. We break our draft record from 2021 in terms of first-rounders. That is a fun thing to consider. Derek Tillman's got Georgia going 15-0. Tech and the Brothers says this will be the third of 4 straight national championships. I love that. Evil Stetson says Brock Bowers, Carson Beck, both invited to New York City. Ty Withers says Beck might get injured. Brock Vandagriff comes in, just like Jake Fromm, and leads us to the three-peat. I guess anything's possible, I guess. Josh Cahill, gave us that one a moment ago, too. Ross Chadwick predicts Branson Robinson to be this team's rushing leader. Lee Baggs predicts Arian Smith to have double-digit touchdowns. Ethan Peppers, we had one of these yesterday, too. It's kind of that's kind of a play on the whole Nolan Smith thing. Ethan predicts Georgia goes 7-5. That way, that can be the person that kind of motivates Georgia, to much like Nolan Smith was kind of calling for that a year ago. So, Ethan, that is very funny. Stephen Lee says Georgia should, and the emphasis here is on should, run the table into the playoffs. He says Tennessee will be tough. He says SEC championship game should be a barn burner. So, Steve, on top of all of that, Phil Go Dogs also calling for that three-peat there as well. So those are really fun, too. Jeffrey Cockerham got UGA going undefeated. I thought this was funny. Cheek Dog says that Mary Beth's going to ground Kirby Smart for using the F word on TV, which I think is really funny. Nate Reichard's got 5 first-round picks next year's NFL draft. UGA Nation 412. Also got the 15-0. Tim Hope says three-peat. Doug Hansford kind of predicting maybe missing Todd Monken a little bit. Blair also having some fun with the whole 7-5 thing. I like that. Smith DK4 has a nice prediction about Branson Robinson there. Dimitri Sullivan got Dogs 2 pass catchers, each receiving 1,000 yards. G Things got a big prediction for Carson Beck, setting the passing record. Stephen Burton says concerned about Carson Beck right now. And then Ace McNeil says Georgia's going to beat Tennessee in a last-minute touchdown. I know we got more to do. Let me get our comments there for a moment. I told you we had so many great ones of these. Trying to share as many of these as we can. But just some really good stuff there on that. All right, a few comments here now, and then we'll get ready to wrap up our week. I'm going to go to DawgNation.com first because I was late on our 1st and 15 today, and so I want to make sure we do that. Randy Hall says Buc-ee's has great restrooms, and that's where Auburn has set up their football offices. But Randy, that's very funny. That's very funny. Very funny. Let's see what else. DT says Kaylee has something from Finland in that Buc-ee's cup. Obviously, reference to our friends at the Long Drink. Listen, I wouldn't put it past her, but hey, if that's what she's got going on, she's still. I'm kidding.
Hey, I'm a firm believer that you can't drink all day if you don't start in the morning.
That's
but
right.
You guys are going to get me fired. Before
No, that's right. Yeah.
Started, so we've got coffee in this cup for today's sake. We'll save the long drinks for the weekend.
That's exactly right. We should point out that we are totally just joking about that. What I was going to say is that she's run the show so smoothly that I would say that whatever's in the cup is doing just fine because the show has gone so smoothly. But that's exactly right. Kaylee's exactly right about that. Let's see what else. Brandon Griffin says some hungry 3-stars willing to work can be diamonds in the rough. The Georgia staff have gotten good at finding these guys. And, Brandon, I think you're right about that. I mean, I obviously, like anybody else, get excited about these elite 4- and 5-star recruits that Georgia brings in. But I think Georgia's kind of proven to you here when it really sets its sights on a 3-star player, and it obviously doesn't always work out that way, but I'd say Georgia's batting average on players of that recruiting pedigree, it's been about as successful as anybody could have ever hoped to be. I think that's right. DT, welcoming Kaylee to the family. Yes, she has been a great addition to us here at Dawg Nation. Kaylee and I have worked together on high school football for a couple of years, so Kaylee's someone I've known for a long time, but a very, very positive addition here to our Dawg Nation team for sure. And sure enough, like, between the two of us, like, she's got the way harder job. Like, me just sort of sitting here talking is nothing. Like, she runs everything behind the scenes, and I'm very impressed by it. Like, she could come closer to doing my job than I could come to doing that job. I can promise you that is the case. But we are very happy to have her here today. And I hope you've been watching some of the great Next Generation stuff that she's been doing there at Dawg Nation, too. There's a lot more on that on the way here, too. Kirby's Belt says the closest Buc-ee's to me is Florence, South Carolina. I haven't been to that one. They're kind of popping up in more places now, right? You kind of wonder, like how many. I mean, they're just so big, right? And it's amazing. You can go anytime, morning, night, whatever else. It's always full. It's always packed. It's just really made. Like I said, it is the combination between a gas station and Disney World. It's just it's wild. Foster Moss says, "Have a great vacation, B.A. Esquire. You deserve it. Hurry back." I appreciate that, Foster. Thank you very much. Let us see what else. Do they really have Kirby's Belt says they have 72 gas pumps? Yeah, like the thing I first heard is like they were supposed to have so many gas pumps and so many spots in the bathroom basically that you never have to wait. And pretty much that's I guess pretty close to what it is. Army Dog Charlie says 128 gas pumps. And it's a lot. I mean, you have that one long bay. Like most of them are kind of configured this way. You have like the one long bay, then you turn, you have another long bay after that. Bunch of them. See Nature Gator in here. By the way, Nature, how you feeling? I know you mentioned you had a little bit of a health setback the other day. How have you been feeling? I meant to ask you about that. Let's see what else. Frederick Meredith says BA does not like the Gators very much. No, indeed, that is the case. That is indeed the case. Let's see what else. Brandon Griffin says you need a lot of gas pumps at the Buc-ee's in Auburn. That way you can get the hell out of Alabama. Yeah, that may be the case. Georgia on tap. I will pass those kind of words on to Connor. Yeah. So Connor revealed yesterday that he had an auto accident, and he's not hurt, but it was kind of a traumatic thing, as you might imagine. And so we had Connor on the show on Tuesday. Connor's been kind of away from work a little bit, but he did want to be on the show on Tuesday. He and I did a video after the Riddell commitment the other day. So I had not really talked about that publicly because it wasn't really my news to talk about. It was his story to break if he wanted to, but he did share that on social media. So yeah, kind of a harrowing thing. So I appreciate you saying that. I will pass it on, George. I appreciate that. Thank you. G. Greg Spammer Boy says, I passed by the Auburn Buc-ee's heading to God's country in South Alabama. Love it. There you go, G. Grace. There you go. Nature Gator says, I'm couch prone most of the time, but a smile on my face. Well, Nature, I'm happy to hear that you are in good spirits, and we're happy to have you here as a part of our show here today. Let's see what else. William Perry asks a good question. He says, what is my prediction on the breaking news that will happen while I'm gone? Almost certainly something will, but, and I don't mind telling you, I kind of root against breaking news while I'm gone because obviously if something big happens, I would wish I was here to talk about it. And so I try to select a vacation time that A, serves my family's needs, but also B, kind of comes at a time in which hopefully there won't be as much of a risk of something really, really big happening. So, William, I think it's a really good question. And I guess the thing that I think is probably the most likely to occur would have been something related to the SEC schedule model. But based on what Jere Morehead said, this week, I'm not quite so sure now that I think they're going to have their ducks in a row enough to announce that. And maybe no announcement's also somewhat news. Are you on guard for commitment? I guess maybe so, but I'm not sure I would even know who the next likely domino to fall might be, unless it's Casey Poe or somebody like that, maybe. James K says, thanks for the golden shoe. I'll throw it with pride. There you go, James. He says, have a great vacation. I appreciate that. Thank you. But yeah, so William, to answer your question, if I had to place odds and the most likely big news, it'd be finding out about the SEC scheduling model. But even if they were to say, hey, we're going to go to a 9-game model, I don't get the sense they're ready to say who the 3 Georgia permanent opponents would be if it is 9. But if they were to announce 8, we know that Georgia's not playing Auburn every year moving forward, and I would say that's still a pretty big deal. Frederick Meredith's been concerned about the blue chip defensive lineman. So you heard me ask Jeff about Justin Scott today. At least I hope you did. So maybe that'll make you feel a bit better about the defensive line situation. Thomas Dyson says the ESPN thing is frustrating. It seems like nobody has a plan. Yeah, I mean, I sort of get the SEC on this of if we're going to give you more, we want more money for it. And I guess I sort of get the ESPN idea of we've already signed the contract, like every negotiation is won by the party who wants the result the least. That's just how life works. And so I think there are some SEC folks that like to play the 9-game conference schedule. And so the ESPN folks, I think, are just kind of sitting back and saying, well, maybe they'll do this on their own and we'll get the benefit of this without having to pay for it. But I think behind the scenes, they're trying to raise the idea that they won't expand to 9 as a way of getting ESPN to sort of step up if they do want to benefit from this. Because here's one of the things I think you might see going forward. Like I've always said before, that, and this is not a reference that everybody's going to necessarily get, that in the future, like if we look at 2 power leagues well removed from the rest of college football, the SEC and the Big Ten, that in the future, the SEC and the Big Ten might not so much operate like the American League and the National League or the AFC and the NFC. They might operate a little bit more like the WWE and AEW, 2 leagues that sort of pretend that the other league doesn't exist. It may be a little bit more like LIV and PGA Tour, where, that there's a certain toxicity from the standpoint of one side looking at the other. For instance, I could see a scenario sometime in the future in which they don't let SEC teams and Big Ten teams play during the regular season, because if you're ESPN and you have the SEC contract, you don't want one of your teams going and playing on the other spot. And basically, Georgia is supposed to play Ohio State in a few years. Georgia plays Ohio State. That game airs on Fox. That's ESPN losing something it otherwise would have if Georgia wasn't playing a Big Ten team like that. I sort of wonder if you might see that. Plus, there's a very passive-aggressive thing that exists in college sports where for a long time Texas and Texas A&M haven't been playing each other, and the thought is that neither side wanted to play the game because they both viewed playing the game as helping the other side. There was a certain form of validation to even play the other team. Texas didn't want to play Texas A&M because it was mad at Texas A&M for going to the SEC. And then Texas A&M didn't want to play Texas because it sort of felt like by being in the SEC, they'd proven themselves to be a bigger brand, and you had this kind of passive-aggressive thing going on. Well, if you could do that with 2 in-state rivals like that, you better believe you could do that with 2 leagues going forward. So I foresee a scenario in the future where it's at least possible that the SEC and the Big Ten kind of operate as true warring factions, like AEW and WWE, for those who care about pro wrestling, where you don't even acknowledge the other entity even exists until you actually have to, maybe in a college football playoff type situation. But in terms of regular season games or kind of cooperation on anything, you just may not see much of that. Thomas Tyson says the Texas A&M stuff has been petty, and I totally agree with that. Kenneth Holt says, doesn't Arkansas have a rivalry with Texas? Yeah, I mean, the teams that I think benefit from the SEC expansion is a team like Arkansas, because Arkansas and Texas is a pretty big rivalry. You want to go back to the 60s, there's been some good stuff written about this. Back when Arkansas was very good, Texas was really good. Like Texas-Arkansas was a very big game. And if you told Arkansas fans you could beat any team in college football in a game, who would you want to beat? I'd say the majority of them would probably say Texas, even more so than Alabama or something like that. Arkansas fans don't like Texas. And when Arkansas has beaten Texas, it has been a very big deal. That is certainly true. Another team I think that benefits from the expansion is Missouri. Like Missouri, I know that Seth Emerson had something on this in The Athletic. Missouri may be one of those surprising sort of lesser teams in the SEC that's more in favor of the 9-game conference schedule. And if you're left to wonder, why might that be? I think Missouri wants to play Oklahoma each and every year. This is an old Big 8 rivalry. And like Missouri just does not have much of a brand within the SEC. Right now, they're just like the outpost team. They're way up north. They're way out west. They're a long way away from this conference's epicenter. And they really have no distinction to their name whatsoever. Well, you bring a team like Oklahoma into the SEC, a team that Missouri has a real history with, going back to the days of the Big 8, all of a sudden now that's a little bit of an identity that Missouri didn't used to have. So I think Missouri is another one of these schools that benefits from the expanded SEC, because all of a sudden now you're bringing a team back into the league they have a little bit more history with. Michael Porter, thank you very much. I appreciate that. Thank you. Let's see what else. Frederick Meredith says that Justice Haynes and Caleb Downs still sting. And listen, yeah, we don't sugarcoat stuff like this. I mean, those are recruiting battles I would love for Georgia to win, and not winning them, you do expect to feel something from that. And, I mean, we've talked a little bit about Alabama lately about, is this still a true championship contender? Well, if it is, the pathway for how that happens, I think, absolutely centers around how much they get out of Justice Haynes, how much they get out of Caleb Downs. The truth is, Caleb Downs could be, he could sort of fit into like a Minka Fitzpatrick type role for Alabama, or kind of be, that dominant defensive back type player. I mean, I think he's that good, and he could be the kind of guy that really raises the fortunes of the Alabama defense. And if Alabama is going to be a playoff level team this year, a guy like Downs having that kind of season, I think that's pretty important. Justice Haynes, much the same way. Now, he's not the only big-time running back they bring in. They're also bringing in Richard Young, too. But if you're thinking about, well, how does Alabama identify itself offensively this year? It may not be through the quarterback position the way that it has been. And their pathway towards being, true, authentic playoff contender, a guy like Justice Haynes having a huge season, I think would be a part of that there, too. Let us see what else. Over here on Facebook. Joseph Kennedy says we should have gotten Haynes. Yeah, I wish Georgia would have. I really do. Kevin Chapman says, I hope that Poe comes to UGA. Seemed like Georgia hit a home run with his visit. Yeah, it seems like Georgia's still in really good shape there, and I think it's just a matter of, when we maybe hear something there. Johnny Prescott, that's very funny. That is very funny, Johnny. Ken Holcomb says the only game I'm a little anxious about is the Tennessee game in their house. I still think we run the table. Yeah, I mean, I get where you're coming from on that. I do take seriously what one of our bold prediction guys said a minute ago, which is at times the Tennessee game may have been discussed too much, and I still don't think, and I know I've done a couple of shows related to this, I still don't think people have talked necessarily enough about that road game at Auburn. I don't expect Auburn to be good enough to keep that game close necessarily, but I do think, as one of our commenters, one of our bold predictors a moment ago mentioned, that game could be sneaky tougher than you realize. Barry Watkins says, for the record, the Bucky's in Auburn is actually nowhere near the university. Well, there you go on that. AJ Ferraro says, running back depth for Georgia and the corner opposite Lassiter are the biggest questions for me. That seems fair. I think I would probably agree with you on both those fronts. It sounds like the competition apart from opposite Lassiter has been pretty good. So it's just simply, the sense that I get is it's simply a matter of identifying who the best is, not hoping you have somebody capable of playing. I don't get the impression they're that worried about it necessarily, but it is, seeing a guy emerge there is obviously really important. The running back thing, if Georgia was more worried about running back, I think they would have sought out a higher level of transfer running back. Instead, they bring in Lyneth Whitehead. We believe he's on a walk-on type situation. Savon Clark returns to this team in kind of a walk-on type role. And if Georgia were concerned about Branson Robinson's injury or Kendall Milton's injury or the development of, some of those guys, Dejon Edwards' ability to maybe take on a larger role, if they were truly concerned about that, they may have sought out another player in the transfer portal. The fact that they didn't may be somewhat telling there. Joseph Kennedy says, what if Andrew Paul turns out to be the best running back on the team? I guess anything is possible. I think something that Kirby said during the spring kind of jumped out to me on Andrew Paul, that Paul is about where Nick Chubb was, a year after his injury situation that he had sustained in 2015. And the Nick Chubb we saw in 2016 was nowhere near what Nick Chubb was, I believe, in 2017. So, Paul may be back eventually. He may be playing and he may be contributing. But even if he is, 1 year removed from that knee injury, if Kirby says use Nick Chubb as a guide here, Chubb in 2016 was not what he was in 2017. He was just way better 2 years removed for that. So keep that in mind. Ken Holcomb on the subject of the Bucky's in Calhoun. He says there's 120 gas pumps. Yeah, that's the one like you would go to on your way to Knoxville. So yeah, a lot of folks using that for some of their North Georgia travel. All right, it got late fast. All right, let me run through the comment sections one more time. We'll get ready to go. Bill Russell, thanks for the kind words. I'm looking forward to that. I appreciate that. West GA Dog fans, same thing there too. West GA Dog fan also predicts that the biggest news that's going to happen while I'm going to be gone is that Georgia announces it's returning the fullback to the offense. Hey, I wouldn't mind that, West GA. That's pretty good. I appreciate that. Jacob Yarborough says they say the ACL injuries usually take a full year and an offseason to recover from. I don't expect Paul to be a huge contributor for the offense this year. Yeah, we may just not see the best of him this season. I think that's entirely possible. Paul Moon, thanks for the kind words. Appreciate that. Army Dog wants to do another Dog Nation appreciation like we did with Nick Chubb and Sonny Michel. Yeah, I would love to do that. I really would. You know, the calendar gets somewhat tricky on that sometimes, but I'd love to get back to doing that again. I really would. Frank Patterson says what BA fails to see is the GOAT Kirby was comparing Andrew Paul to Nick Chubb. Glory. Glory indeed, Frank. Christy in here having a good time. Love to see her doing that. Jack Fullerton having some fun at Nick Saban's expense. Good stuff there. Garrison Souls on the subject of Arian Smith. Yeah, that's a guy who I think could be really fun to watch this year, assuming we get a full year of a fully healthy Arian Smith, which right now we believe could be the case. That could be a really fun thing to be able to see. All right, so let us get ready to say goodbye to you here today. Fun weekend on tap. You can read more about it online, ajc.com. All the big Memorial Day weekend things going on in the city of Atlanta. Also, last night, wild scene at Truist Park with the giveaway of the Outcast bobblehead and the massive, massive crowds that came in there for that. Not everybody that wanted one got one, but the Braves did get a nice win. A couple big home runs from Austin Riley. So you can read more about the Braves. They're online, ajc.com, and just kind of following everything else that's going on there too. And make sure you check out our friends at RS Andrews online, rsandrews.com, for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, electric needs. Of course, right now, it's those AC units that you're thinking about, getting tuned back up to factory fresh specs. Maybe yours is old, it's tired, it's beyond its shelf life, and maybe some company somewhere has told you need to get a new one, and one of these days you may actually need to. But for now, RS Andrews may be able to tell you how you can get some new life out of that old unit, and it may only cost you $99 to do so. So find them online at rsandrews.com to find out more about that. So truly, genuinely, sincerely, I say to all of you, thanks so much for being a part of our show. Thank you for being with me here this week. Thanks for tuning in next week while I'm on vacation. Thanks for allowing me to step away from work for a little while. You know, we try to enjoy some time with our family this time of year, spend some time with my kids while they're still kids, and soak all of that up. So I do take that very, very seriously. But I also love doing this show there as well. So you better believe after a series of pre-recorded shows next week, I'll be chomping at the bit to be back live with you again the following Monday. So hope all of you have a great weekend. Enjoy your week coming up, and we will talk soon right here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Kroger.